Picture this, you're 6 years old, wearing a wedding dress that weighs more than you do, standing in a cathedral filled with hundreds of strangers who are celebrating what they call your marriage. The man beside you is 34 years old enough to be your father, and when the ceremony ends, everyone cheers as you're carried away to chambers that will become your nightmare. This isn't a fairy tale. This is a true story of Marie de Montpensier, who became a wife before she even learned to read properly. What happened to her on that wedding night in 1386 was brutal. That servant found bloodstains on the marble floors that took days to clean, but that was just the beginning of a horror that would consume her entire childhood. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. To understand Marie de Montpensier's story, you need to grasp the complex political situation of 14th century France. During this period, noble families used their children as tools to forge political alliances, but Marie's situation was much darker than a normal political marriage. Marie was the daughter of Duke Jean de Montpensier. Born in 1380, she was a beautiful, intelligent, and lively child. However, her father decided to use his daughter for a strategic marriage due to increasing political pressure and financial difficulty. This decision was made when Marie was only 6 years old. The chosen groom was Louis de Bourbon Montpensier, 34 years old, wealthy, and a powerful nobleman. But Louis wasn't chosen solely for his wealth. The man was known for specifically marrying young girls. He had previously married an 8-year-old, then a 10-year-old. Both had died before reaching age 15. Marie's family knew this history. In fact, they chose Louis precisely because of it. Louis was willing to pay astronomical amounts for his young wife's dowry. Marie's father sold his daughter's life to improve his financial situation. The marriage contract contained details that would be considered disgusting by today's standard. It included clauses guaranteeing Marie's age, physical development, virginity. The contract even explicitly stated that Louis had the right to educate Marie. Everyone knew what this education really meant. 6-year-old Marie wasn't told the complete truth about this arrangement. She was simply told, "You will marry a handsome prince and live in a grand castle." To the child, this seemed like a wonderful adventure. She wasn't old enough to understand the horror awaiting her. Marriage preparations lasted for months. Special dresses were made for Marie, a dowry was prepared, and most importantly, special rooms were arranged in Louis's castle. The preparation of these rooms was very different from preparing a normal child's room. They had thick walls, soundproof doors, and very special furniture. In October 1386, Marie de Montpensier's wedding day arrived. When the child woke up that morning, she didn't know she was living the last normal day of her life. Servants bathed her, perfumed her, and dressed her in that heavy wedding gown. The wedding dress was much larger than Marie's body, made from heavy silk, decorated with precious stones, and it made it nearly impossible for the child to move. But this was intentional. The dress was designed to prevent Marie from escaping. The wedding ceremony took place in the great hall of the Bourbon Castle. There were hundreds of guests, noble families, church officials, political figures. They had all come to celebrate this blessed day, but actually, they were all watching how a child's life was being destroyed. When Marie entered the hall on her father's arm, the expressions on the guest faces were mixed. Some were smiling, some felt uncomfortable, and some were openly excited. The 6-year-old bride looked so small that she nearly disappeared next to her 34-year-old groom. During the ceremony, Marie's behavior clearly showed her age. She couldn't stand still, was yawning, and was frightened by the strangers around her. The expression on her face was confused. She couldn't fully understand what was happening, but sensed something was wrong. When the marriage vows were read, the priest had to bend down to hear Marie's voice. The child's voice was so small that it got lost in the large hall. When she said yes, she didn't know what it meant. She only knew that her parents wanted her to say it. The wedding feast was torture for Marie. She had difficulty sitting due to the heavy wedding dress, couldn't understand adult conversations, and felt the increasing tension. As the guests drank more wine, the conversations became more explicit. Some made jokes about the wedding night, others called Louis a lucky man. As evening approached, Marie's fear increased. When servants took her to the special rooms to prepare her, the child finally understood that something was very wrong, but it was too late. Marie's wedding night preparations were more horrifying than any nightmare a child could imagine. Special servants, all women, all carefully selected by Louis, bathed the child, perfumed her, and dressed her in a special nightgown. This nightgown was very different from a normal nightgown, made from thin, nearly transparent fabric. It was designed to leave the child's body completely exposed. When Marie asked why this nightgown was so strange, the servants simply said it was a traditional bridal nightgown. While the child was being prepared, Louis was also making his own preparation. In the special section of the castle, in rooms only he used, he had prepared everything necessary for the wedding night. This room resembled a torture chamber more than a normal bedroom. When Marie was brought to the special room, what she saw froze her. The room was draped in red silk, lit with candles, but the most terrifying aspect was the special items in the room, things the child didn't understand but instinctively feared. When Louis entered the room, Marie's fear turned to panic. The man man was no longer the polite nobleman she had seen at the wedding. In his eyes was a dark desire that the child couldn't understand, but could feel. Marie tried to run, but the door was locked. We don't know exactly what happened next, because records from that period were very careful about such matters. But the sounds coming from the castle the next morning told the whole story. Servants said that Marie's screams from the room could be heard through the thick stone wall, while some interpreted these sounds as a natural result of a wedding night. Others knew this wasn't normal. When Marie's room was cleaned the next morning, the servants were shocked by what they saw. The sheets were covered in blood, much more blood than from a normal wedding night. The marble floor was stained, furniture was damaged, and most horrifying, the child's nightgown was torn to shreds. Marie was no longer the same child. She wasn't speaking, wouldn't look at anyone, and was constantly trembling. The lively, cheerful 6-year-old girl had disappeared, replaced by a fright-broken shadow. Marie's first days of married life were a constant cycle of nightmares for her. Since Louis was married to the child, he thought he could use her however he wanted, and this use continued not just at night, but during the day as well. Marie was given a special room, but this room was actually a cell. The windows were to hide, the door was constantly locked, and the interior was arranged to prevent the child from escaping. Servants constantly watched her, not to protect her, but to control her. The child's daily routine was horrifying. When she woke up in the morning, her wounds were cleaned and fresh clothes were put on her. She was required to sit next to Louis during lunch, but most of the time she couldn't eat. Due to her trauma, she constantly felt nauseous. In the afternoons, Louis gave the child education. This education was very different from normal child education. Marie was taught to behave like an adult woman. She was taught how to walk, how to sit, and most importantly, how to please Louis. During this education, Marie's resistance was punished. When the child cried, she was beaten. When she tried to escape, she wasn't given food for days. The most horrible punishment was being left alone in the special room, the room where that first night had occurred. Marie's psychological condition deteriorated rapidly. She was experiencing what modern psychologists would define as complex trauma. Her speech became impaired, nightmares became daily occurrences, and she began to hate her own body. The most tragic aspect was that no one considered Marie's condition abnormal. Child brides going through an adjustment period was considered normal. In fact, some noble ladies visited Marie and told her she was lucky. The servants working at the castle were uncomfortable with Marie's situation but couldn't intervene. Louis had given them strict instruction. They wouldn't talk about Marie outside and wouldn't tell anyone what they saw. Servants violated this, were immediately fired, sometimes disappeared. By the time Marie's marriage entered its second year, some changes began to be observed in the child. She no longer cried constantly and obeyed Louis's orders more quickly. To outside observers, she had adjusted. In reality, her spirit had been completely broken. She was experiencing what modern trauma psychologists call learned helplessness. She had learned that resistance didn't work, escape was impossible, and the only way to survive was submit. At age 7, when most children were playing with toys, she had developed survival strategy. This adaptation process completely changed Marie's personality. From being a lively, curious child, she had become a quiet, obedient, and emotionally dead shadow. She had forgotten how to laugh, stopped playing games, and focused only on satisfying Louis's desire. Louis was pleased with this change. His wife being less resistant meant he could use her more comfortably. He even showed Marie to other noblemen as an example of successful education. During this period, Marie's physical development also stopped. Constant stress, inadequate nutrition, and trauma prevented the child's normal growth. When she reached age 8, she maintained her 6-year-old body structure. Louis was pleased with this because his goal was to keep Marie looking as childlike as possible. Other nobles visiting the castle considered Marie's situation normal. Some even found Louis lucky. The child bride culture seemed so normal that no one questioned that this was actually systematic. Child abuse. Marie's only recorded act of rebellion occurred when she was 8. When Louis did something particularly painful to her, the child attacked him with her nails. The punishment for this rebellion was horrible. Marie was kept in a dark cell in the basement for a week, fed only bread and water. After this punishment, the last spirit of resistance in Marie was also broken. She had become completely submissive, a tool that did Louis's every wish without question. When Marie reached age 9, something horrifying happened. She became pregnant. A 9-year-old child becoming pregnant was extremely dangerous physically, but Louis and his family celebrated this as a miracle. Finally, an heir would come. What Marie experienced during pregnancy was just one dimension of the pain she endured. The child's body wasn't ready for pregnancy. She was constantly sick, had difficulty walking, and was in constant pain, but she never complained. She had never learned to complain. When it came time to give birth, Marie's body couldn't handle this trauma. The birth process lasted for days and was extremely difficult. The baby was stillborn and Marie suffered massive blood loss. She nearly died. During this period, something interesting happened. When Marie came face to face with death, the last spark of light inside her emerged again. While lying in fever, she called for her parents as if delirious, saying she wanted to go home. It was as if the shell created by trauma was cracking and the real child inside was emerging again. But this awakening was short-lived. When Marie recovered, she returned to her old submissive state. Perhaps coming so close to death had made her even more fragile. When she reached age 10, Marie's health condition deteriorated completely. She was constantly sick, sick, had difficulty walking, and had trouble speaking. Louis could no longer get as much benefit from her as before and began making new plans. In the winter months of 1390, Marie mysteriously fell ill. Her symptoms resembled poisoning, but at that time, no one had the courage to question this. Within a few weeks, she died at age 10. Her death was explained by Louis as a tragic illness. A grand funeral ceremony was held, and Marie was remembered as a beloved wife. In reality, they had gotten rid of a thing that was no longer useful. After Marie de Montpensier's death, her story was systematically attempted to be hidden. In official records, she appears only as a noblewoman who died at a young age. The trauma she actually experienced, the pain she endured, and how her life was stolen as a child is not recorded anywhere. This silence was not coincidental, although child marriages were normal at that time. What Marie experienced exceeded even normal standards. What Louis did to the child was found disturbing, even by the clergy and moralists of the period. But since power and money both, no one raised their voice. From a modern perspective, what Marie experienced was one of the most systematic and organized examples of child abuse. It included not just physical abuse, but psychological manipulation, social isolation, and identity destruction. Marie's story contains very important lessons about power dynamics and child abuse. First, it shows that abuse is not a perversion seen only in people from lower class. Even the most respectable people, when they have power, can abuse the most defenseless. Second, it shows how social acceptance and normalization facilitate abuse. What Marie experienced had been legitimized under the names of marriage and tradition. This is the same method that abusers still use today. Most importantly, Marie's story doesn't belong only to the past. Today, millions of children around the world are being abused in similar ways, being deprived of their right under excuses like tradition, religion, or family structure. According to UNICEF 2023 report, approximately 12 million girls worldwide are married before age 18 each year. Most of these children, like Marie, are sold by their families without being asked for their own will. Modern child marriages show great similarity to the situations in Marie's time. Girls are deprived of education, subjected to physical and sexual abuse, and have their childhood stolen. The risk of dying at young ages due to pregnancy complications also very high. Marie de Montpensier's story is not just one child's tragedy. It's a warning containing unforgettable lessons about power, politics, and social acceptability. The systematic abuse experienced by this child married at age 6 is a historical version of the realities that millions of children around the world still experience today. Marie's story shows us this. Protecting children is not just an individual responsibility, but a social necessity. Her pain is not just a dark page from the past, it's a lesson that the present must not forget. Every child has the right to a safe childhood, and this right cannot be sacrificed for any tradition, belief, or economic. And although Marie's voice has been silenced for centuries, it is our responsibility today to speak in her name and prevent similar tragedies from occurring. These dark pages of history should be remembered not just to understand the past, but to make the future safer. The 6-year-old who was sold into marriage died at 10, having become the very thing her trauma had created. Her story reminds us that behind every empire's glory lies a foundation built on human suffering, and that the price of power is often paid by those who have no choice in the matter. Her memory lives on not as a victim, but as a call to protect the innocent and ensure that no child ever again suffers such calculous cruelty disguised as tradition.